This episode is sponsored by Winter Victor Studio.
Mesdames et messieurs, the greatest festival of our contemporary society, the Olympic Games, is about to begin.
This is going to be close.
Oh! They're all completely gassed! They've given it everything on the global bucket! Oh, yeah! Go! Oh!
Brilliant, brilliant, brilliant. But that is an Olympic championship.
Ready?
Hello, fans of TKFLASTAN, and welcome to another episode of Keep the Flame Alive, the podcast for fans of the Olympics and Paralympics. I am your host, Jill Jaracz, joined as always by my lovely co-host, Alison Brown. Alison, hello, how are you?
Hello, it is very springy here. It is very springy here.
It's sunny out today. Gonna get on my bike. It's gonna be really warm this weekend. Very excited.
Yes, so this has led to several accidents on my part. Everyone was so sweet on the Facebook page saying, "Oh, we're so glad you're back from Beijing safely." Who knew that getting me home and spring cleanings, revamping of things has caused so many injuries. So far, I have smacked my face with a car door. I have hammered my own thumb and I have dropped a table on my foot.
Do you need to volunteer to help you protect yourself?
Apparently, I need a shoey Ron suit to wear to protect me from myself, or maybe even the big Dwen Dwen because he fell over like a weeble wobble and would just balance. I need a whole team to protect me from myself, clearly.
I need a team to protect me from you because I just told you about a fantastic new iteration of a sport, and you wanted to hurt me for even mentioning it. And I wanna
I
say
just
that
threatened to punch you, and I do apologize.
no, that's okay, I understand because I would have wanted to punch me too, because the and this doesn't really fit anywhere except for the fact that we talk about weightlifting a fair amount, but the International Weightlifting Federation has introduced a new format called street weightlifting. It's just like the street trend, get on it.
Okay, wait, we can't mention weightlifting.
The weightlifting theme song.
It's the weightlifting theme song. Here, just another way that you can dope. Get your drugs on the street.
Ooh, ouch, ouch, but basically, they're gonna have a apparently teams of 2 people from the same country will be weightlifting outdoors to showcase that weightlifting can be done in an urban setting, even though there's plenty of gyms in cities, and I don't get it, I really don't get it. This to me is like, "Oh, urban sport or street sports have jumped the shark."
Maybe they'll weightlift each other. And that will be
That would
the
be
urban
fun.
quality that you can make do with what's ever available on the street, like, they'll lift trash cans and lift cars and lift other people.
See, that's what I thought, but that's called strongman. We already have that, and it's its own fun. Do we need more street sports? This is like the 70-year-olds who are in charge of the associations are just like, "Street, urban, we need to have that to get the kids." And so they're just coming up with street whatever. Can we throw a balance beam out in and have street gymnastics?
That's parkour.
Well, yeah, but, they don't stick the landings all the time, do they?
If they don't have an ankle anymore, which apparently is the sport for me since I continue to injure myself.
I wanna know what listeners would think a good street sport would be. Like, what other versions of street sports are out there? Or could be out there? What sports could we turn into a street sport? Let us know. I would love to hear this. We would like to thank our sponsor, Winter Victor Studio. Winter Victor Studio believes that sport and beautiful design go hand in hand, and that a designer's versatility is just as important as an athlete's dexterity. Winter Victor provides distinctive graphic design to clients in sport, from logos to digital communications. Winter Victor brings the same passion to design that our clients bring to the field of play. Add a responsive and versatile designer to your team at wintervictor.com. And I gotta say, if you have not visited wintervictor.com, you will have not seen the other lovely designs that they have produced.
We just go hang out and look at things.
That's right. That's what we do. Speaking of looking at things, we can look at photos today. Today, we are talking with Mark Edward Harris. Mark is a professional photographer whose work has taken him to over 100 countries. He has a master's degree in pictorial and documentary history from UCLA, and he started his professional photography career doing stills for, and this is really important. This was very exciting to me, doing stills for the Merv Griffin show. And if you're young and go, "What was that?" Oh, we'll get into it. Mark's work has appeared in a number of leading publications, which you've probably seen it. He's been in Vanity Fair, Life, Condé Nast Traveler, Time and Newsweek, National Geographic Traveler, Forbes, New York Times, and more. He's won a Clio Award for advertising photography, an Aurora Gold Award for commercial directing, and an ACE Award for directing and producing a video for television. He's published a number of photography books and has spent a chunk of the last year taking pictures of the Olympics because he was in Tokyo and Beijing. We became buddies in Beijing, and he sat down with us in the main media center to talk with us about sports photography. Take a listen. Mark, thank you so much for joining us. How long have you been in photography?
Well, I started my professional career with the Merv Griffin show.
No way.
Yeah, which dates me back years, and so that was from 83 to 86. I did do some professional work before then, but that was really the career launch. Not necessarily in the direction that I really envisioned, but it was a great starting point, that's for sure. So I did two things at the same time. I did the green room, so I took care of the guests, and then when they went out on stage, I would photograph them. And my roommate at the time actually said that, how does it feel to be in fear of being replaced by a Coke machine? For working in a green room, of course, I mean, here, we have the kitchen here, and so you can see all the animation that's being done that gets all the food to you without any contact. So if we had had that back in the Merv Griffin show days, I would have been out of a job.
I got so many questions on Merv Griffin. I hope you got time.
I'm here. I've been here since February 1st and staying through March 14th, and so time is something that I do have here, that's for sure. Except for when I walk out on the yard. We got the yard where we can pace around.
Right.
And then I return to the big house.
What was it like working for Merv Griffin?
Merv was a great person to work for, and I actually learned a lot because besides shooting, I learned years ago to illustrate my own photo essays with words. And so that included interviewing a lot of other photographers and other people. And so I really learned a lot from Merv in terms of he really listened to the answers of the people instead of going down a list of, okay, here's the next question. Obviously, what you guys do so well. He did that. And I think I learned a lot from that process. But as a human being, he was really a great guy. It was a great 3.5 years. But, toward the end, I think the show really became the cure for insomnia. And so the show just ended. And so for me, it was good because it was too good a gig to walk away from, but I really did want to move on. And when the show ended, I took off for Asia for 4.5 months to build up a portfolio of what I really wanted to do, which was more, documentary travel work, which I've been doing pretty much ever since.
So when you do documentary travel work, how do you make money? That's really what I wanted to ask. How do you make money on this?
Well, that's an excellent question, and it's something I still really want to know. If we find anybody out there that knows the answer, I'd love to hear it. But no, it's a combination of things, and it's changed a lot. At one time, I did a lot of freelance work for magazines, where let's say the London Sunday Times magazine, it was a good day rate. And I would go out and shoot, let's say, a story in Hawaii. Somebody would write it, and then I would go illustrate it. So I had, 7 days at a pretty good fee per day. And so editorial rates, were pretty good, and work was steady. And then also I would do commercial work. So I did an around-the-world campaign for Coca-Cola, where I did stuff on their outreach programs, and for a huge mural at the World of Coke. For Nobu, I don't know if you guys know Nobu Matsuhisa. Nobu, the famous chef, the restaurants, and he worked with Robert De Niro, and I created a whole bunch of hotels. They took my Japanese hot spring series, and they used it for all the suites in a couple of their hotels. And so those, selling those prints really supported some other projects. And the latest one that I've really been working on, besides obviously, the Olympics, Paralympics here, was on orangutans. My latest book is called The People of the Forest, and that's actually what the word orangutan means. It breaks down as people of the forest. And, those prints are selling, the book's doing very well. So it's a combination of things. So that's a long answer to a short question, but that's pretty much, so a combination of selling prints, of editorial fees per day. For the Olympics and Paralympics here, I'm working with Zuma Press, and so they put out the images, so I get paid for the usage there. But it's always a scramble, and it's changed a lot. You know, things have changed over the years. You know, everybody has a camera now, and even, you know, the iPhone creates enough pixels that they could be reproduced in a double-page spread in a magazine, where it used to be, you know, only really the pros had the equipment for that size image. Now everybody can. And so I've seen huge changes in the income sources through photography. But it's still out there, but you just have to be like a platypus and keep evolving and seeing which way to go. And you know, for a while that meant including, you know, video, where all of a sudden, you know, art directors were saying, hey, could you shoot some video content while you're out there? And it could mean the difference between getting a job and not getting a job. If you didn't know how to produce video content, then they would just find somebody who could and do both at the same time.
How did you end up here in Beijing 2022?
Well, that came out of Tokyo 2020, which actually was in Tokyo 2021. You know, I'm a big Asia-phile, and so I've done a lot of work in Japan, and so when the Olympics were going to be there, I really looked for an assignment that could get me there. And so one of the things that I got was to do a big feature for Newsweek on the Paralympics in Tokyo. And I speak Japanese pretty well, and so that helped me move around. So the Japanese hot spring book that I did brought me back and forth to Japan all the time. I covered the tsunami, which in Japan they call, you know, 311, and did numerous stories for Vanity Fair, other magazines. And actually there's another one about to come out in Japan because we're coming up on the anniversary. And so it made a logical fit that another story out of Japan would be the Olympics and Paralympics, and that also gave me a good excuse to stay there for 2 months, and which I did. And then in between the two, I went back up to Fukushima, where the tsunami hit, and did the 10-year look at the area's recovery, because I had been there just after, and then 2 years after, 5 years after, and 10 years after. And so that's sort of that platypus kind of thing again. So multiple stories, from a trip. I mean, I think that's the only way to survive these days. You have to generate a lot of stuff. But Tokyo led to coming here. Because of the success of my coverage of Tokyo, one of the agencies that I happened to meet when I was over in Tokyo said, well, why don't we work together? And I said, I would love to. And so that brought me back here. And I've always loved sports, so the combination of documenting, the greatest sports competition in the world, which are the Olympics and Paralympics, is really amazing. Though I learned the hard way that Winter Olympics are much harder to cover.
So what was the experience at Tokyo?
Well, it's funny because we thought we were living in a bubble there, but they don't know what a bubble is. I mean, this is a bubble. I mean, we really are isolated here. There, once you went through the short quarantine period, you could get out, take public transportation, move around. Of course, they didn't have Omicron then. So coming to Beijing was a direct result of the Tokyo Olympics and success there. And so working with Zuma Press got me here. And as all the other photographers with Zuma Press left after the Olympics, I wanted to stay on. Because the Paralympics, I find, just like with the Tokyo Paralympics, my biggest stories for Newsweek was on the Paralympians and their backstories. And so I purposely looked for something that was, because as you guys know, you have to look for a hook. What's really strong, you just don't want to do an overview all the time. And so I focused on 3 Paralympians that became Paralympians by acts of violence, but not wounded warriors. In other words, it was not from being in the military. Haven Shepard, her parents in Vietnam were not married to each other. They had an affair, had the kid. They were discovered, and so they thought if they could be together forever, if they killed themselves. They tried to blow themselves up along with their daughter. She survived but lost her legs. Her biological parents died. She was adopted, brought to the U.S. That was one person. Another person was an equestrian who was at the Brussels airport when they had a terrorist attack, and she became crippled by the blast. A third person was in a McDonald's parking lot in Iowa and was shot by somebody with PTSD. And so those were the hook, and they were all 3 U.S. Paralympians. And also I grew up with a father with a pretty severe case of polio. and but who was a great athlete anyway, even though he had one dangling arm and a curved spine. So the whole concept is not unfamiliar to me at all. And so I think that's an extra hook that draws me to the competition here that we're witnessing now with the Paralympics started.
What's different about shooting sports versus shooting nature?
Well, there's a certain amount of predictability. Well, I guess if you're really an expert with wildlife, you can sort of predict the movements of animals to a degree. With sports, they're set up at a certain time, depending on what the sport is. If let's say downhill or slalom, you could pretty much focus on one of the gates, and you know that the action's going to come through it. It really, that said, it really depends on the sport. Something like hockey, you don't never know exactly where they're going to go. You can anticipate some degree. And also shooting sports really depends. There's a lot of speed involved. Nature, of course, you do have instances, let's say with a leopard running or something like that, but typically that's not the case. The animals are going about their business or whatever. Or if you're shooting nature shots, you might sit in one place for hours and wait for something to happen, the perfect light or whatever. Some of the most important things to shoot in sports takes place in a fraction of a second and as a one-time thing. And it's not good enough to just say, oh, shoot, I just missed that. It's if you missed it, like Shaun White's, last run and retiring for the Olympics, you missed it. You can't say to him, hey, would you mind doing that one more time? It just doesn't work that way. And so there is a lot of pressure in that. There's as a famous National Geographic editor once said, we publish pictures, not excuses. And so you have to get the shot. So there is a lot of pressure to get the shot. But, you try to get to a venue early when you can, sort of scope out the angle. I mean, obviously, at the Olympics, Paralympics, there's photo positions that you're given. You can get what they call a field of play position, which is typically the desired position, but there's very few of those positions, so you have to get to the venue early or sign up online. And then you have to hope that whatever's happening, let's say with ice skating, happens when you're there. And then there's the unpredictability of, we had the Russian skater that, supposedly was on an illegal substance, and, she fell a couple of times. Well, I happened to get a shot of her falling right in front of the signage, saying Beijing 2022, which really adds to it. If you just have a picture of somebody on the ice, it could be anywhere. But I'm constantly looking for signage to help give a sense of place. And so a lot of photographers actually tend to shoot tighter than I do. I like to shoot a little wider and do more of environmental portraits and give you, not just this could be anywhere. But when you look at newspapers and stuff, often the pictures are really tight shots. Magazine work tends to allow for a little more, wide shots. People tend to linger over a magazine photo longer than a newspaper shot. So there's actually different approaches to it.
And how does that vary when it's published online?
Well, online can be a little bit wider too, because a person can sit and linger with that for a while. Both can work. I mean, coverage, it used to be when I first started out, a lot of newspapers were still working in black and white, so often you would have to shoot black and white and color because it was actually film. And then with digital, everything happens so fast, and now a lot of people are shooting a little bit wider with one camera and tighter with another. And of course, now we have zooms that are good. When I first started, zooms were really not of great quality, and so you would always have to have two camera bodies with different focal lengths on it. You would shoot two different cameras so you had different coverage, tight and wide. I try to stay a little simpler and just really get what I think is the key shot and not do tons and tons and tons of shots to make sure I've got coverage. It's like really what Cartier-Bresson, is one of the great photographers, said he always went for the decisive moment. And if you're a mitraillette, if you're a machine gunner, maybe that's the best way to miss it. In other words, I'd rather really look and see something than now, with the new Z9, the Nikon Z9 that I have, it can shoot 20 frames per second in RAW. But just imagine when you have a 2-hour event and you can shoot 20 frames per second and there's a lot of stuff going on, that's an insane amount of film. And I was guilty of that, depressing the shutter too much for the Olympics. I'm trying to adjust that approach now with the Paralympics.
When you press the shutter too much,
Yeah.
Like, what kind of results do you get? Or is it on the back end when you have to go through and kind of process things and you see the percentage that's usable versus not usable?
The percentage goes way down. And it does make sense. Let's say now that there's like 3D tracking on a camera, you purposely start the action before, let's say, that decisive moment when you're going around the gate. And so let's say you start 3 seconds before, you get 3 seconds afterwards. So that's, let's say, 6 seconds altogether. That's 120 frames. And you're only going for that one shot. So it doesn't mean that only 1 out of 120 frames is good or usable, but maybe there's 10 frames in there, so 1 out of 12 might be good. But I also felt that I was shooting a lot of bad stuff from the first time around, that I was depressing it too much and not really looking enough. And so readjusting to that. Because when I'm out in nature, out in the world shooting my documentary stuff, I mean, I'm still from the film days, like when I went to North Korea, I've been there 10 times to do 2 books. Well, I actually switched to digital purposely to do that series, because if I walked into North Korea, with 100 rolls of film, I would stand out too much. And so that was my first really foray into the digital world. But I shot in a film style, meaning, you have a roll of 36, you really were careful with that roll of 36. And so that's traditionally how I shoot. Sports just tends to be the exception to that approach.
Does having a knowledge of the sport or the event help you in getting that picture?
Oh, 100%. I mean, case in point, just like occasionally I shoot the Dodgers when I'm back in LA. And so I used to, in high school in American Legion, I pitched, and so I was a pitcher. And so to know the form, so you know that, okay, if he's a left-handed pitcher, you get over to the left side so his arm doesn't block as he's coming across. This morning I was photographing para hockey and had a good sense of that. I knew where the player was coming, where he was going to shoot. You can't be an expert on every sport. I didn't know anything about curling at all. And I've come to actually like it and understand it a lot more since, I've been here and actually see it in person. I really had no idea how tough it is. And the way they just sort of slide along. I mean, it's really a surprise. And I didn't really understand the whole thing about how they use a broom to maneuver the stone. And so there was a bit of a learning curve there to understand. I thought, okay, wait a second, I got to pull a little more depth of field in order to get the person. I mean, do you say sweeping?
Yeah.
That is the word?
Yeah, that is the word.
Wow. So to get that person in focus, and then also the person, what do you do? Push the stone? Was there a word?
You throw it.
You throw it?
Yeah. I mean, you do. It's a push. You don't lift the stone off.
No, but that's
yeah,
actually called
you
throwing.
throw the rock. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, some shots I got where I just really focused on the person throwing the stone, but I thought, well, there were a few shots that I had to throw out because I didn't get. I thought, okay, this would have been better if I got the person brushing in front and the person throwing the stone both sharp. We're often in sports, you're going for very minimum depth of field well, actually, in a lot of photography, especially people-oriented, you're often going for shallow depth of field to bring the viewer into the person and the emotion. But there's certain times, and I think in curling, it's one of them where it's nice to have, not necessarily shoot a wider shot, but have more depth of field so you see the actions of both people.
Right, and with such a long sheet of ice.
Exactly. Well, then you can have a long lens for and compress it so you get that sense of, and also, of course, the Olympics, you have to shoot from a pretty good distance. So typically you shoot with a lot of longer lenses. But then the decision is, well, what depth of field do you want to have to achieve the desired results? And so I think that does vary from sport to sport.
How much does the emotion of an event affect you? So, for example, you were at the figure skating. Mm-hmm. Jill was there. I watched that on TV. Emotion seemed very, very high. So do you feel like as a photographer it's better to get that feeling from an event, or do you feel like you need to be more objective to get the shots that you want?
I think, we're still, it's interesting because there have been photographers that have talked about, covering, war. There was Philip Jones Griffiths who did a book called Vietnam Inc. One of my best friends, Nick Oot, who did the picture of the little girl hit by napalm in Vietnam. both have talked about, especially Philip Jones Griffith, if you get too sucked into the emotion of it, as he said, you can almost just curl up into a ball and start crying. I mean, the horrible things that he saw that happened in Vietnam. And so he sort of stepped back and had a very doctorish approach to shooting. Nothing really rises to that emotional level in terms of the anguish or horrors, of course, in sports. And so I think it's fairly easy to sort of allow yourself to get excited, and sort of inside root for somebody. I did want to see Shaun White, take home a medal. Of course, I can't be yelling out, hey, come on, kid, go for it. I really did feel very bad for the 15-year-old Russian athlete who fell twice, and you almost felt sick to your stomach. Once she fell very early on in the routine, you could see the life sort of went out of her, and she just wanted to get through that routine. And Jill, since you were there, you saw it. She just sort of, in disgust, just sort of waved her hand at the end. I really felt bad for her. And there was a second athlete. There was the girl that skated for the Chinese team, but learned it in the U.S. Remember, there's a whole bunch of controversy, and she fell as well. And I actually said in one of the features that I put out, center stage could be the loneliest place on earth. And one of the photographs I shot, I think, really conveyed that, how she just had to pick herself back up on the ice. And there was really a hush, in the Capitol Stadium. It doesn't matter who you were rooting for, whatever. Everybody felt it and felt bad. That was more, I think everybody had that human response. These people are on the world stage. And just imagine, and I saw this, of course, in Tokyo as well with the gymnastics, how people are able to focus, and like stay on a beam and flip over and jump and do things. And with just everything they're doing is being scrutinized. And so, I definitely feel for them, for sure. But I have to be careful not to get too wrapped up, because I really have to focus on, okay, where do I need to get this shot? What angle do I need? Is something merging with their head? Because I'm a big, should I say, focuser on the design of a shot, really using my sensor as a canvas and trying to make sure that things as best as I can, things line up where there's not, the words on the boards, merging with their heads. So if you see a number of my shots, like let's say for skating, between Beijing and 2022 is where I would like the skater to be. So I'll purposely look for a seat to try to get that angle. And it's amazing how, even though everybody's doing different routines, they seem to end up and use the ice in the same way in ice skating. Did you notice that at all?
Yeah, they do tend to. I think part of the score is how well they use the ice.
Yeah.
So there do tend to be patterns that skaters take.
But did you notice they tended to sort of go sort of in a counterclockwise?
Oh yeah. Now that you say that, yes.
Yeah, and so I started to notice that after a while, but I also sort of took the lead from a lot of like amazing sports photographers that's all they do, and so it's like, why are they all sitting right there? But so positioning. So what you talked about earlier, knowledge of sport. Yeah, if it's like, hey, this is the direction they're going, so they're going to sort of play to this. Obviously, they're going to play to the judges, and so one approach is to sort of shoot as near the judge's line of sight as you can, shooting out, because that's a big focus. But then if you go the exact opposite direction, then you get them performing for the judges, and you get the judges in a shot, which is really interesting too. So much goes on before they ever take the ice or head down the slopes, and so much of what you decide to do will dictate everything else from there. And then it's just the mechanics of making sure you're in focus and all the technical things that go into making a shot work.
Do you stake out one spot during an event, or do you like to move around where you can?
It's tough. I might work a situation for a while and say, you know what, this just isn't working. Maybe I should try another vantage point, or maybe it's best if I just, stay here, like this is really working. Because you might get the bronze medalist from a great position and think, okay, I've worked this place enough, now I'm going to try somewhere else. But then it's really the gold medalist that's going to be the shot that's you really want or keep, and so you might as well stay in that same position. But just like the opening and closing ceremonies, if you're in position A, and literally it is position A, you have a high vantage point and you get great overview shots. But the one thing that's really missing is you really don't get to see the fireworks so much. And so some photographers do set up a second remote camera down in position B with a super wide angle, like say 8 to 13 millimeter lens shooting up, and then you can get the fireworks. My approach is going to be shoot from higher up for the opening ceremony and then low for the closing ceremony. And there is, because of what's going on in the Ukraine now, a strange pale over stuff. And so the words we saw at the closing ceremony, remember that?
Oh, right.
Yeah.
One world, one family.
You got it.
Yeah.
Really, it's going to feel very strange during the Paralympics because you can't put an asterisk next to it. Right. And so actually that's worked its way into my coverage now for the Paralympics to get some of the story about what's going on. And you both were at the press conferences here about that. I don't think anybody expected or wanted this to invade, and that's a bad maybe choice of words, but the Paralympics. But they have, and that's just the reality of it.
So what has been the experience so far here in Beijing? We've talked about the cold.
Yeah.
You've had a little tough time with the cold.
I did, and the thing is, there really is such a thing as when you live in a place that you get thinner blood, and so even though I work in Japan and I hiked in the Everest trek and all that bit, I really do have thinner blood, and so it was minus 16 Celsius, which I think is about 3 degrees, and I was out for hours on the giant slalom and ended up with 6 fingers with frostbite. And that's what it's starting to peel away now, all the dead skin. And so I feel like within a few more days I'll be back up in the mountains shooting, but it's going to be a lot warmer. Being in the bubble has been tough. I have great friends that live in Beijing, and so originally I was really looking to hanging out with them, especially between the Olympics and Paralympics. But instead I find myself walking the yard, which is the park area allowed for us to do our walks. We go out into the exercise yard for 1 hour a day, then we have to return to the big house, which is the MMC. So it's definitely different here. But there's a great group of people here, and we're able to go to other hotels for the restaurants there. And so I feel, and this is just like in Tokyo as well. Since I spent so much time in Japan, I know Japan so well. But it's really unfortunate that the people that were in Japan could not experience Japan more. Instead we were in a press room and they were serving peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, if you guys remember that. Here, there's so much in China that's amazing, but they don't get to, get out and see it. I mean, but for those of us who travel a lot, we're fortunate that we do get to, see it. So it's not as devastating for me because I know I'll be back here. I was here 2 years ago. I'll be here next year, I'm sure, when things open up again. And so, yeah, it definitely has an effect. But, we're still here for the sports. And I think it's amazing how they've pulled it off. And just like, once again, with Tokyo, I mean, in the middle of a pandemic, you're able to bring the world together to do sports. That's a pretty incredible thing. And so, actually, part of the thing I'm doing is combining my work from Tokyo and Beijing under a heading, The Miracle Games. And so I do envision the possibility of a book out of this, with the hook being that they both took place during a pandemic.
Do you have a favorite picture from Tokyo?
Well, a favorite Paralympic one would be a Haven Shepherd jumping into the pool, and it really describes everything there because it's, she's in a bathing suit and she doesn't have her lower legs. And I think that's a very powerful shot because you see the athleticism there. And as I said, because having dad with polio, or having had a dad with polio, I think I have an extra connection there. So that's a strong shot. The opening ceremony, Tokyo, with the fireworks, is a strong shot. But there's probably about a dozen, I would say, that I really feel good about. In terms of from Beijing, sometimes it's hard to get a perspective from within something. And so maybe I need a little more time to really, know which one will rise, above the others.
What kind of gear do you have?
Actually, this is the first time I'm shooting with mirrorless cameras, a serious assignment, and so this is with a Nikon Z9. And I've got what they call the holy trinity of lenses, so the 14 to 24, 24 to 70, 70 to 200, and then, of course, for sports, you need longer lenses. And so NPS, the Nikon Professional Services, loans us lenses. So even though back home we might have really long glass, at events they typically set something up so you can borrow for a day or two a long lens. And so, often the 400 is really a go-to one for sports here.
So I'm the money person out of all of us, and during the Olympics, every time I ride the bus and there's a bunch of photographers on, I always think that there's probably at minimum $50,000 worth of equipment on the bus.
How many photographers?
Yeah, well,
would you say?
just a few, but like,
Okay, well,
how
depend-
much? How much does your gear stuff run?
I have a feeling you're going to jump me after this interview.
No, I promise I won't. I don't have enough room in my suitcase.
Oh, okay.
I have a lot of audio gear to pack.
Oh, that's true. Actually, you have really good stuff, too, come to think of it. I love your setup, too. Well, it's expensive. It's expensive because just the camera body alone is almost $6,000. And so they have the lens, and this is the lens that I'm going to borrow. A 400 millimeter 2.8 costs $13,000. That's just for one lens, but it's a 2.8. But that's one that most people just borrow or rent. They don't typically. Well, actually, sports photographers might have that. Companies like Getty Images, would have that. I don't know how many individuals. Somebody like Franz Lanting, who's a great nature photographer, I'm sure has that as part of his arsenal, I would say. So yeah, I've got a pretty healthy amount of equipment here. So I carry a think tank roller bag, and which is sort of counterintuitive. You think with all the snow and ice, you really need a bag that's just a backpack bag and no wheels. But in reality, if you look at all the photographers here, almost all of them have rolling bags, and many of them convert into backpacks, and so that's what I have. But then I have a pure backpack, a think tank backpack as well, and so if I go up into the mountains for some coverage, have that. And then they have storage lockers at each place. But speaking of economics, so if you looked at everybody's storage locker, there's probably about at least I would think $15,000 per person.
Okay. That makes
of
sense.
Equipment, I would say. And do we need that stuff? Would we for a reproduction in a newspaper? I mean, these prints could go super huge, but it's really more about the speed of focus. That's really what you're paying for with these higher end cameras, not just the sensor that produces that can produce a really big image, but the speed of focus, because things are happening so fast. And so that's where these fast lenses like that 400 2.8 or the Nikon Z9 with super fast 3D tracking. Because if you have, let's say, speed skating, for example, and somebody's coming around an oval and they're coming right at you, if you don't have the state-of-the-art equipment, the focus will drag slightly behind, and then you'll miss the shot.
How much does all of that weigh?
That's an excellent question, and people ask me that, and I always say I've got to weigh it to see, and I never do. I don't know if it's like 30 pounds or something.
Okay. Does it feel heavy to you, or no?
Well, that's the great thing about like the think tank backpack. Mm-hmm. It's made with back support, because I do have back issues that I have to be careful about, and so I choose the bags carefully, because you don't want to be, especially the winter really is much tougher. Not only because I got frostbite, from the giant slalom, but you have to get crampons in order to get to a photo position up the hill. And so that's why I have tape, if you notice, on both of I have my snow pants on today because we're going to be sitting outside. But because the big crampons, and once again, this is what I get for all these years living in California. I was walking up and I caught my pants with my crampons, and I ripped my pants, fell down face first into the snow. And I was just laying there thinking, what am I doing? My fingers are frozen. I've ripped my pants. I'm just laying here, and then you think, well, I'm at the Olympics. This is pretty amazing. Well, was I really thinking that at minus 16? I might have been using some different words. I'm not sure. But at that instant. But I mean, I think once you defrost, you realize like how amazing it is.
I had a question about your hands.
Yeah.
And how the frostbite affected your ability to work.
Here's the thing, hand warmers are a great invention, but what you really need are finger warmers. hands are pretty easy to keep warm, right? But finger warmers are the key. And when I really had the really serious frostbite, I actually started using my middle finger to depress the shutter. So I think when other photographers would come up and say, hey, could I sort of share this position with you? And then I would use my middle finger to take a picture. It's like, well, gee, all you have to say is no. So, but no, I really did use my middle finger. I could not use my index finger to shoot. It was tough. And also now, because everything is so digitized, and I'm not talking about using the touch screen stuff. I disable that. I don't like using the touch screen anyway. But I really did struggle with in the freezing cold to try to work with some of the settings now. We're in the old mechanical days.
What are you looking forward to for Paralympics?
Well, definitely I want to focus more on slalom and downhill ski stuff. Looking back at the Olympics, I think, and partially maybe because I had injured my fingers, I spent a lot more time photographing the indoor sports. I mean, of course, figure skating, singles, couples, and all that, just so amazing anyway. But I did, in part, spend more time indoors because of the fingers. So now I want to spend more time out because it is going to be warmer up there. And I think a lot of the excitement of the Olympics and Paralympics are the downhill ski races, and so that's what I'm really looking forward to getting out and trying to capture. And of course, the added amazement of seeing people that might only have one leg or using a special apparatus to get down a mountain, but at these incredible speeds, just adds to the excitement and power of the potential image. So I would say that's top of my list right now for sure.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, Mark, thank you so much for being on the show. We really appreciate it. Well, thank you so much, Mark. It has been great talking with you, and
Thank you, Jill.
we really appreciate it.
Thank you, Alison.
All
I
right.
appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Mark. You can learn more about Mark at markedwardharris.com and follow him on Instagram at markedwardharrisphoto. We will have links to both of those in the show notes. He's got a bunch of books he's published that are very cool looking. He's done some projects in North Korea. It's absolutely fascinating, the work that he's done in North Korea, I think.
And he was working with Merv Griffin.
That's right. He was fun. I kept after the interview. I mean, we had seen each other several times and talked a lot. And then I ran into him almost every day. Oh, Mark and I snuck into first class on the bullet train. That was exciting because he figured out that once you get on the train, because there was nobody riding it, basically, they didn't really care where you sat. So he's like, let's go to first class. Oh, those seats were nice. I will say that. Got a lot of work done that day. So.
Troublemaker.
That's a nice sound to hear again. That is the sound that means it's time for our history moment. And all throughout 2022, we are focusing on Albertville 1992, which is the Winter Olympics in France. Today is your turn for a story. So, what do you got for me?
Okay, so we're at the opening ceremonies. We talked so much about the beautiful costumes we saw in Beijing of the women who escorted the teams in of the Parade of Nations. I was watching the opening ceremonies, and this is a winner. They were human snow globes in Albertville. And we've got to put a picture up, and I'll put some video of this up in motion, but it is a full-blown plastic ball. The woman stands in the center, and that snow moves around.
Oh, okay.
So it was designed by Philippe Guillotel. He has since gone on to design things for movies and Broadway. He also did the costumes for the band New Order for a video called True Faith. And if you see them, if you go back and watch it, you'll say, oh, I remember this. So the coolest thing about this costume is that it looks like there is no way these women can walk. But this was so brilliantly designed. The bubble of the snow globe stops above the knees. And that whole black piece at the bottom looks like it's stiff. It isn't. It moves. So when you watch these women walk, they have a perfectly normal stride.
Interesting, because for a second I thought they were on wheels, and I'm still hopeful that they are wearing clothes underneath the snow.
Okay, so underneath the snow, they have a skin-colored bodysuit because here's the best part. The plastic bowl does not touch them. The snow doesn't touch their skin. There is an inner tube that they stand in, and then their arms are in the snow globe, and they swish their arms around, and that makes the snow fly within the cylinder.
Oh my goodness.
So in motion, this is gorgeous. In a still photograph, it looks ridiculous.
It does.
It does look ridiculous, and then the bottom black portion looks like it's very stiff, but it wasn't. It was a tube that actually made it very easy to walk. So when you look at the still photograph, then go back and look at the thing in motion, but the coolest part is different women did different arm movements, so different countries had different snow effects. So, of course, the woman who had the France snow globe, she was going crazy. Swaziland, she just, like, was flicking her hand, and the snow barely moved. So, they were definitely trained on how to properly move the snow within their snow globe, and it was a great effect. It is so early '90s, it is fantastic. And I bet these are incredibly lightweight as well.
I will take your word. I'm going to go back and look at this because yes, when I saw this in a still photo, I went, "Whoa, boy! It looks like it should be in like that Mia Jovovich Fifth Element movie." Especially the bottom part, because that is very, like you said, very early '90s with these rings of fabric that are kind of rubbery looking as well.
But they moved.
Latex.
I think they were latex, so the key was the ball hit you above the knee so you could do a normal stride, and there are, supports. So I bet this thing was even lighter than those dresses that we saw in Beijing because the dresses in Beijing had laid up elements, they had beading. Those were probably incredibly heavy dresses. This is just, plastic and latex and flip your arms around and make a snow globe.
Far out. But it is very Olympic. I will say that. It does make a definite statement.
Welcome to Shukflastan.
Yes, it is time to journey over to the country of Shukflastan, where our members of Team Keep the Flame Alive reside. Those are people who have been on the show in the past, and they now represent Team Keep the Flame Alive and our country of Shukflastan. So the U.S. Biathlon had its national championships, and biathlete Clare Egan won the sprint and pursuit competitions, which is a very nice way to end your biathlon career. She and her teammate Susan Dunkley were on the US Biathlon podcast Heartbeat with host Shukflastani Tom Kelly.
When Shukflastanis collide.
I love it.
And gold medal winning speed skater Erin Jackson was honored to be named as the Olympic Female Athlete of the Year at Utah's State of Sport Awards.
John Nabor has been approved to serve an additional 4-year term on the USOPC Board of Directors, so he is very excited about continuing his work with them. You're getting to play that twice in one show.
That is not a good sound to play twice in one show.
No. So we have a definitive. Did we talked about this before with the Team GB, the men's 4x100 relay team for athletics. One of the members got hit with a doping violation. They have officially been ordered to give back the medals and pins and certificates and everything they got as part of winning that award. So the Court of Arbitration for Sport ruled that Chindu Yuja took a banned substance. In a statement released through United Kingdom Athletics, they accepted the decision. He said he never knowingly took any banned substance, blaming his positive test results on a quote contaminated supplement. So it's sad that the whole team has to now give up their awards. And it's interesting because Yuja also raced in the men's 100 meters, but he didn't get out of the heats. So whatever it's always curious to know what happens here. But sad day for Team GB. That means that
Canada moves up to silver and China moves into the bronze.
speaking of China, There's an article from the Global Times, a Chinese publication, saying that the ice cube has been opened to the public and 2,000 Beijingers visited it on the first day. And it's very cool. It was basically kind of an open house. Come and see what the curling venue was like. They said they kept the authentic scenes of the Winter Olympics, including the competition area, media stands, mixing area, athletes' locker room, and podium, providing a full scene experience of the Winter Olympics atmosphere.
I wonder if they had a little paper cutout of me getting mobbed by our fans
I
curling.
wonder if they were still there. Did they bring them back? I was just like, hello. When I read this, I really missed all the volunteers very much.
And that was one of the venues with Snickers bars, so I hope everybody who came got a Snickers bar.
But it looked like a fun event. I also think that it was preserved because they're just tired. They're still taking down other venues, and they're just like, "Oh, you get a day off. Take a week. You deserve it." But very exciting. The they're gonna keep it as a dual venue, it sounds like. So they'll transform it to a swimming pool for summer and then back to the ice cube for winter.
Interesting. Be interesting to see how long because that's an expensive conversion, how long they're gonna keep that up.
Well, okay, let's do the math. It's, not 31,000 bucks? 30,000. So it would take they said they've gotten that conversion down a little bit because they said the quote is, "At present, our technology of water ice conversion is very mature." And they estimate it takes like $30,000 US to transform the pool into the cube. I bet as they learn how to do that, it gets more and more efficient.
But that's still $60,000 a year, right? Because you gotta turn it back.
Depends on how many people were using the pool in the winter. I mean, it's an indoor pool and it looks like a still looks like a lovely, lovely facility. So I wonder how many people decided to go swimming in the winter. Would they do better by having more curling?
Hope those 2,000 people found the bathrooms easier than I did.
In the future, the water ice conversion of the main pitch is expected to take place once a year. Maybe it's cheaper to drain it.
We'll keep an eye on it.
And we have a little bit of follow-up from the International Paralympic Committee. When Beijing 2022 was on, the athletes got to vote for different athletes council seats. There had been a tie between Rico Roman and Mitchell Gorley for the 3rd seat, and so the tie has now been broken. There has been another election, and the Australian Mitchell Gorley, who is a skier, will be the 3rd member of the Athletes Council. So, very excited to see what the IPC Athletes Council does in the future. And I think that's gonna do it. I mean, we've just come off of vacation week, so there's we're still catching up on news.
And jelly beans.
Ah, that's right. Was the Easter Bunny good to you?
Easter Bunny was very good to me.
That's good.
Brought me injuries.
All right. Well, next year the Easter Bunny will bring you a nice little volunteer to help you.
And if you have suggestions for getting me healed up, we'd love to hear from you and get in touch with us. You can email us at flamealivepod@gmail.com. Call or text us at 208-352-6348. That's 208-FLAME-IT. Our social handle is at Flame Alive Pod, and be sure to join the Keep the Flame Alive podcast group on Facebook.
Next week, we will have the return of one of our TKFLASTANI authors. David Davis is going to be back on the show. He's got a book that's been out for a while called A Waterman about Duke Kahanamoko, the swimmer and surfing legend. But it's being turned into a documentary that will be on PBS. So we're going to have David on to chat about the book and the movie project. So we will look forward to that conversation next week. Thank you so much for listening, and until then, keep the flame alive.